All right. Good morning, church.
Morning.
Good to see you this morning. So I'm glad that you're here. Glad that you're a part of our worship service this morning. We have a few that are out. We have some visiting with us. They can't hear me. That's a good thing. That's all right. They can't hear me. That's a good thing. They've been talking to my wife. But we're glad you're here. Good to see you, and hope that you've had a good week, and hope that you'll have this coming week a good week as well. You know, words are important, aren't they? Words communicate. Words communicate thought. They communicate action. They communicate what we're thinking from the standpoint of how we feel, our emotions. Words are important, and folks like to keep their words going. You know, as we get a few birthdays on us, one of the things that begins to slow down just a little bit is finding the right word. Why? Because we don't use them as much. And so they recommend, they being doctors and things of that nature, they recommend that we do crossword puzzles and seek words, and that we maybe involve ourselves in some of the different that you can get on your phone or on your tablet or on your computer at home, Wordle and other things like that, so that you might keep your vocabulary going. Words are important. With regards to that, let me ask you, how are you at riddles? Let me give you a riddle this morning. The riddle says, I have no bones, yet I'm strong. I can hurt or heal with just a song. I taste, I talk, I twist with grace. What am I in this hidden place? Now, you think about that for just a second. Now I'm going to let you be honest with me when you walk out. You tell me if you got the right answer. Here's the answer. It's the tongue. It's a pretty easy riddle, to be honest. I did not write it. AI wrote it. It was simple. I think I put level and I put it low because I wanted to figure it out first. But we want to talk this morning about the tongue. Words that we use to express our feelings, our emotions, our judgments, our thoughts, our knowledge, our inspiration, our encouragement, also our warnings, our distaste, thoughts with regards to how we feel that maybe things need to be corrected. As we think about those things, we have to think about, well, when we use our words, one of the things that we don't do before we use them. We use them, and we use them correctly most of the time. We use them really because God intended for us to use them, but we use them a lot of times without filters. And I think it is important and wise for us to give a little thought or to think before we speak. Isn't that somewhat what James said with regards to really anger? But James says that we're to be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger, slow to speak. That's what we want to key on this morning, that we need to be slow to speak. And I want us to use the word think, because it's what we need to do. Think before we speak. How many times have we said something and said, oh, I wish I had thought about that, or I wish I had given that some thought, or I should have thought before I said that. And so I want us to use the word think as an acronym, and it's been used this way many, many times. This is not original with me except for the material underneath each point. But I want us to think this morning about our words and our words that we use, and we need to ask ourselves before we utter something, the first thing we need to ask ourselves, is it true? In Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 22, Solomon in his wisdom said, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal thoughtfully are his delight. Lying lips are an abomination. What's a lie? Well, some might say a lie is what is not the truth. Well, that's good, but that doesn't tell me a lot. A lie is that which we tell in order to embellish the truth. A lawyer would tell us the lie is that which is told in order to gain over others. A lie is a twist of the truth. Maybe it's just a little twist, but it's still a twist of the truth. And when we tell those lies, we tell them for various sundry reasons. Maybe we tell a lie because we think the truth will hurt somebody's feelings. Maybe we tell a lie because as we think about the story, we like to make the story a little bit bigger than what it really is. And so we tell a lie in order to we just kind of stretch the truth. Well, there's enough truth in it to be true, but there's also, if you stop and think about it, there's enough falsehood in it to be false. Sometimes we tell a lie because we're just prone to do that. Back in my teenage years, worked with a guy who was a school teacher. He's just working summer work with us kids, and he'd tell you a lie before he'd tell you the truth. Sometimes we tell lies because that's our way of escaping. The reality of it is, though, the Lord doesn't want us to tell lies. Reminds us in Ephesians chapter 4 that verse 29 that we're to put away lying, that we're to speak truth to every man with his neighbor. There are 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are abomination to him. One of those 6 is lying lips. See, the Lord never intended for us to lie. He intended for us to tell the truth. He tells us the truth, and he expects us to tell the truth. When we talk to others, we should tell them the truth. Now, admittedly, the truth, as we'll see later on, needs to be couched in graciousness and kindness, but it needs to be the truth. I mean, if your wife tells you, do I look good in this dress, and she really doesn't, you've got problems. You've got big problems. The best thing to do is say, can I take the 5th, and walk out of the house. She should not ask you that question. She should say, this look, or do you like this? But not, well, how do I look? You know, there just the other night, Suzanne and I, we were fixing to go to sleep. We were laying there and we were fixing to go to sleep, and she said something, and I realized there was no way under the sun I was going to get out of answering that question. It was one of those, and I know this is terrible, but it was one of those questions like, have you stopped beating your wife today? Because if you say yes, then that implies that you were beating her. If you say no, that implies you're still beating her. Now, that's a terrible example, but that's the example most logicians use. She asked me a question, or she made a statement, and I thought, there's no way. And I said, okay. And I still lost. There was just no way. Well, that happens from time to time. But we need to be truthful with folks. We need to tell them as it is, but tell them what is right. Now, that includes gossip too, doesn't it? You see, sometimes we tell stories on people and we say, well, so-and-so told me. Well, here's the question. How did so-and-so know? So many times we hear stories from people that are not true, or we don't know to be true. Well, somebody told us. Well, can you put that as a footnote in a reference for a research paper or a term paper? No. We have to check it out ourselves. Hey, I heard this. I heard this good news. I heard this thing. I heard this story. I heard this going on in your life. What is it? Is it right? Is it true? You see, when we open our mouths and we begin to tell it, we must tell the truth. Why? Because all liars have their part in the lake of fire with burned with fire and brimstone. That's what John wrote in Revelation 21, verse 8. And now, granted, some will say, well, lie. It's not one of those big, bold lies. It's just a little lie. The Bible doesn't have degrees. Just tell the truth. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't say, well, just a little bit of it. No, tell truth. And so we have to ask ourselves before we begin to say what we're going to say, is what I'm about to say, is it true? But then second of all, we have to ask ourselves, is it helpful? See, TH, helpful. What did Solomon say again in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 this time? Solomon, with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. For God is in heaven, you're upon earth. Therefore let your words be few. You see what he said? He says, don't be rash. Don't be quick to talk about what you're going to talk about. Don't be quick to say. And sometimes you say, well, preacher, it was a response. And they said, and then I said, and they said, and then I said. And it was just a conversation back and forth. Solomon says, think about it. Don't be hasty with your words. Let your words be few if they need to be. But don't be swift to answer something. Be sure that you think, though, in thinking along that line, is what to say helpful? Will this help the individual? Will this make the individual feel better? Will this make the individual feel as they should feel? Will this be something that will be informational? Will it help them in their knowledge? Will it help them in their emotions? Will it help them in their thinking? See, therefore, I've covered everything. I've covered their knowledge. I've covered the way they feel. Also covered the way not only that they feel, but the way they want to proceed. And so what do? Well, is what I'm about to say, is it helpful? Will it help this individual? Will it be an asset to them? Will it give them something to think about? Now, sometimes individuals may say, if you say something, and there are times when you say something and it's a little levity, it's a little fun. If everything's supposed to be helpful, then we can't have fun. We can't tell jokes, and we can't sort of needle each other from time to time. Not what we're talking about, because you see, sometimes that's helpful. A merry heart doth good like what? Medicine, right? Solomon said that. And I believe it to be true. And if it is true, then, and even doctors tell us that, then it tells us that at times a little levity, a little fun, a little poking of fun at each other is fine. To take a joke and learn to give a joke. We all need to do both. That we get through our thought process. True, but helpful. In John chapter 12, there's an instance where I believe someone spoke, and really what they said was not helpful. In John chapter 12, Jesus is anointed, remember? There he comes and anoints his feet, and Judas speaks and says, why was this ointment sold? Now, it was worth about 300 denarii. A denarii or denarius, or that's the plural and the singular. A denarii was worth one day's wages. One denarii, one day's wages. 300 would be really about a year's worth of wages. That means you didn't spend money on milk and eggs. That means you saved up everything to buy this. And Judas says, why wasn't this ointment sold and the money given to the poor? And John kind of clues us in on Judas' thinking. He says, this he said, not that he cared for the poor, but that he was a thief. In other words, John says, Judas only said that because he was a thief. Now keep on reading. He says that he bore the bag. In other words, he was treasurer, seemingly, for the 12. And so John says Judas was only interested in the money, probably because he was dipping a little bit out of it. So what's the story? What's the point of the story? Well, there's several points to be told, but here's part of what I get out of it. I get out of it, why did Judas ask the question? Really, the statement was not helpful. We're reminded then that what we said is not to be judgmental. James chapter 4, James reminds us that if we speak evil, and if we judge our brother, he says, then we also speak evil and judge the law. And if we speak evil and we judge the law, then we're not a doer of the law, but we're a judge of the law. And so think about that and apply that very principle with regards to people. When we sit in judgment of people and instead of trying to help people, then we're sitting not where we're supposed to be. We've placed ourselves not upon a throne that we're supposed to be sitting in, but we've self-imposed ourselves in a throne in which God has told us to stay away from. And so he reminds us, be helpful, because we need to consider not speck that's in our brother's eye, but the beam that's within our own eye. Whatever you would, therefore, that men should do to you, you do so to them. Matthew 7, verse 3 and verse 12. See, why do we consider the problem in somebody else's eyes? And we don't consider the large problem we have in our own eye. I can help you. I can help you raise your children. I can help you with your wife. I can help you in your work. I can help you with your neighbor. I can help you with anything, but I've got problems myself. I need to realize those. Doesn't mean I can't help. It doesn't mean that I can't assist you with your wife or with your spouse. I can't help you with regards to your neighbor, your relationships to people that you work with or for. I can, or hopefully I can. But it is to say, we as individuals need to ask ourselves, is what we're telling them, is it helpful? Joy was her name, and in many ways, Joy was a joy to be around. But at times, Joy's words and the choice of her words were not joyful for those of us that were around her. And finally, one day, as I was visiting with her, she said something, and it kind of cut a little bit. And I thought, well, that wasn't that helpful, but thank you. And then she looked at me and she said, preacher, if I think it, I have to say it. I said, no, ma'am, you don't. You don't. Just because you thought it doesn't mean you have to say it. And so I have to ask myself, is it helpful what I'm about to say? But then thirdly, we have to ask, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearer. There's a couple of words there, not testing your intelligence, but just as a reminder. Look at what he says. Let no corrupt word. The word corrupt there means rotten. What do we do with rotten things? You ever had anything in the refrigerator maybe got pushed back to the back, and there's 2 or 3 things in front of it, and one day you move those 2 or 3 things, and all of a sudden you find what's in the back end of it, and it's rotten. What do you do with that? Oh, yeah, just leave it and let it smell up the refrigerator. No. You reach back there, and you delicately take it out, and you drop it in the trash can. You throw it away. Why? Because it's rotten. Paul says, let no rotten word proceed out of your mouth, but what's good for edification. For edification, the original word has the idea of a house. The house is in the middle of it, and it's the idea of building up a house. And so he says, only let what is good, what will build up the house, that it may impart grace to the hearers. Is this not only helpful, but will it inspire them? Will it motivate them? Will it encourage them? Will it lift their spirits? Will it make them feel better? When they walk away, or they get off the telephone from talking to us, or they are finished looking at and reading the email that they receive from us, or the text that they receive from us, are they inspired? I always say it. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to run through a brick wall for you. But it means that they feel better and they can move on. Life, when we really stop to think about it, when we really stop to think about the Christian life, is it really all about moving forward? Forgetting the things which are behind, Paul said in Philippians 3, pressing forward to those things which are before. It's all about pushing forward. It's not about dwelling on the past. You see, God said in forgiveness, I wipe those sins away. They're gone. They're finished. They're no more. So it's about moving forward. But it's also about helping others to move forward. It's about inspiring our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. It's about inspiring our neighbor. It's about inspiring the folks that we come in contact with. I like what was said of Stephanus and Fornicatus in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 18. This is really all we know about them, and it's interesting. Paul says that they were his spirit refreshers. They often refreshed their spirits. It was said of Onesiphorus as well. Now, you might call him Onesiphorus, I realize that, but it's actually, you can say it either way, according to theologians. But in 2 Timothy chapter 1, Paul talks about, have mercy upon the house of Onesiphorus, for he often refreshed me, not being ashamed of my chains. Now, we don't know exactly what Onesiphorus did. We do know that he came and sought Paul out while Paul was in imprisonment, and so therefore it took a certain amount of courage, and it took a certain amount of gumption, if you will, for him to show up, and the fact that he showed up was a great plus. But he refreshed Paul's spirits. He inspired him to go on. I imagine while you're in imprisonment, when you're in Roman imprisonment, even in house arrest, but in Roman imprisonment, you're needing a little inspiring. Paul said Onesiphorus did that. Stephanus and Fornicatus, Paul said, did that. They refreshed my spirits. People do that, don't they? 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 10, Paul says, God who comforted us with the coming of Titus. He encouraged us. He inspired us. He pushed us forward. We need to ask ourselves, is what I'm about to say, is it inspiring to others? Did I encourage them? Moses is about to finish his run, if you will, as leader of the children of Israel. And God instructs Moses to talk to Joshua in Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 28. And as he tells Moses to talk to Joshua, he tells him to encourage him. You know why? Because he says he's going to lead your people, my people. He's going to lead them into that land of promise. And so what does he say to do? He says, command Joshua and encourage him. Now, we've talked about that word encourage before. The English word encourage has the word cardia in the middle of it. And the Greek word cardia means heart. It's to give heart to someone else, to encourage, to give them a little lift, to lift their spirits, to make them feel better, to make them want to push on. Someone once said, too many times, our speech is more like an insect that stings. An insect that stings goes and for whatever reason plants its stinger in us and then it hurts us. Instead of being the kind that brings us the sweet nectar of life. In Point Barrow, Alaska, years ago, a couple of gray whales that actually got beat. They got up close to the beach and they got caught in a pack of ice and could not get out. And so what those that lived in that area figured out and what they needed to do is they would go out and they would cut a hole in the ice and they would attract the whale to that hole, and then they would go a little further out to sea and they would cut another hole and they would take necessary steps in order to attract the whales, and they would go to that hole, and they finally led them out to sea from the ice pack. We need to learn to lead others to heaven above. Don't discourage the fellow Christian. Encourage. Don't discourage the neighbor that is seeking encourage. Don't discourage the person that you just met and found out where you go to church. Encourage. And so we need to ask ourselves, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Look at what Proverbs 10, verse 19 says. Solomon says, in the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. Solomon says, if you talk a lot, you might get into trouble. As a child growing up, a wonderful father, elder of the church, wonderful man, humble individual. But my father from time to time would remind me when we would be talking, as I guess I would drift off as any child into the silliness of conversation. he would say, "You're talking now to hear your head rattle." Yeah, probably so. And so I'm reminded from time to time that Solomon says in the multitude of words, sin's not lacking. But if we ask ourselves, is what I'm about to say necessary? Does it add anything? Does it add to the conversation? Does it add to the individual's knowledge? Does it add to the individual's emotions? Does it add anything to the individual to help the individual that I'm talking to? Is it really necessary? Compliments are wonderful. And compliments are necessary. We all live. Mark Twain says that he could live for months on a compliment. We can all live on compliments. Compliments must first be what? True, right? Being true and necessary. See, sometimes we think, well, I don't need to say that's not necessary. Sometimes it is. Sometimes we have to call things like they are. A brother or sister that is fallen away from the body of Christ needs to hear the truth, needs to hear it in love, needs to hear it with compassion, needs to hear the truth that's helpful and inspiring. Why? That then becomes necessary, doesn't it? And so I ask myself, is what I'm about to say to the individual that I'm talking to, is it necessary? Will it help them? In the best way to do this, and count to 10 before I ever answer. Stop and consider my words. Stop and think about, will this help? The lips of the wise, Solomon said in Proverbs 7:15, verse 7, the lips of the wise disperse knowledge. Is it necessary? Is what I'm about to say, will it help them? But then also, is it kind? In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32, be kind one to another. Tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake, for God in Christ forgave you. Forgive one another. Notice what he says. Be kind. Kindness is truly a trait. We often think of kindness, though, as, well, I'll carry them a pie, or I'll carry them a cake, or I'll give them a gift card. Sometimes kindness is found in words. Our words, are they kind? Or are they words that really have true meaning and true emotion? While we understand that love covers a multitude of sins, 1 Peter chapter 4, we're reminded that we're to be individuals that have speech that is seasoned with grace. Have you ever been on a bland diet? You know, that's when you go to the doctor and he tells you need to abstain from salt. Now, and spices and things of that nature. Now we have no salt, which is really not salt, but it's salt. Figure that one out. Anyway, back when I was young, many years ago, the doctor for a few days put me on a bland diet. That's when we fired that doctor. No, I was a kid, so it just worked out that wasn't the problem, thankfully. But I'll tell you, food without salt, you might as well eat the cardboard box. It's not good. Words need to be kind. You see, you can say something one way and it be insulting and terrible. And you can say it another way and it's kind. How do I know? I love animals. Don't have any right now, but I love animals. Love dogs especially, but love cats. Somebody asked me once, why do you have a cat? I said, I have a wife. And so, but we love animals. Take an old dog and just sit there and let it sit in your lap and pet the old dog. Oh, he or she, we'll just make it a he. He's loving it. You see a little smile on the face, a little wag of the tail. They're just loving it. And you look at them and you say, you are the ugliest, nastiest, stinkingest old dog I have ever been around. You're still petting them. See how you've said it to them? What's that old dog doing? He's still sitting there, smiling, wagging his tail. Everything's good. You look at him, and you're still petting him. But you say, you are the prettiest dog I've ever seen. I just love you. What's the dog going to do? It's going to cower, probably. Why? Because of the way you said it. Not what you said. You gave him a compliment in a mean voice. And he reacted voice. We do as well. And so the Bible reminds us, be kind. Be kind also, not just in the word itself, but in the tone. The tongue of the wise promotes health, Solomon said in Proverbs 12, verse 18. We understand that we, in our language, in our words, that our language is seasoned, Paul says, with salt. It's not bland. It's seasoned. It's seasoned with salt. And what's the salt? The salt is the salt of grace. It's kind. We have to ask ourselves before we offer any answer, is what I'm about to say kind? Story is told of a man in a big city. He drove a bus. And every morning he picked up the same riders, then he carried them to the drop-off so that they could get to work. Just every morning he said that as he noticed everybody as they got on, they didn't hardly look at each other. And if they said something like morning, stopped the bus one morning. He said, I love you folks and I appreciate you riding on my bus every morning. It gives me a job and that feeds my family and I appreciate that. But I want to start a new rule on this bus every morning, that when you get on this bus, you don't necessarily have to greet me, but everybody you see, you greet them with good morning. Say it nicely. And he made them repeat it. And so they said, good morning. He said, that's not it. So they said, well, good morning. He said, that's not it. Good morning. You see, they didn't realize they were going to be late to work. He didn't shut up and get driving. So he said, well, good morning. They said, that's it. And they practiced that. And so the next day they started doing it. Every one of them, one or two forgot, but then they began to realize. And by the week's end, he said, every morning the ride was so much better. And the people enjoyed it so much more because they told me. Why? Because they spoke, and they spoke kindly to one another. Dear friends, words are important. We communicate with our words. We let folks know how we feel. We let folks know what we know. We let folks know what we believe they should know through our words. God has blessed us with the gift of speech or the gift of communication. Before we respond, before we say something to anyone, we need to ask ourselves these questions. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? And is it kind? It gets down to this, doesn't it? Think before you speak. David, in Psalm 19, verse 14, concludes that wonderful psalm with these words. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O God, my strength and my Redeemer. May this ever be our prayer. Let my words be what? Let them be acceptable in your sight, O God. This morning, we ask you to look at where you stand in relationship with the Lord. Are you in the right relationship? Have you become a New Testament child of God? As a child of God, are you living faithfully? Maybe you've said some things that have gotten out in the public, and as a Christian, you're ashamed of them, and you want to ask God's forgiveness as you ask forgiveness in the church. The Lord's invitation, come all together, we stand and sing.